Johnny was an oak. Johnny was a young sapling planted in a garden. He grew up next to a small group of rose bushes. One of the young rose bushes, named Ray, was his closest friend. When they were just little sprouts, they looked very much alike. But as time marched on, as time does, it became obvious to little Johnny that Ray was different. And it became obvious to Ray as well. And Ray started associating more with the other young roses. Now, as Johnny looked on, these rose bushes became very pretty. And they started to blossom. They started to make flowers. They were beautiful. Not only were they beautiful, but they started getting attention from the birds and the bees. The bees buzzed around and paid a lot of attention to the rose bushes. Even some of the birds, the hummingbirds, would fly by to check out the pretty colors of the roses. And while Ray was getting all this attention, Johnny felt forgotten and lonely, and he was sad. He had no flowers. And when the rains came and a puddle formed, and he looked at himself, skinny, and at an awkward stage, he became a little jealous of the roses and a little mad at himself. And after a time like this, day after day, looking at the attention that the roses got, along came a lizard. Now this lizard was older and was not happy with its place in the garden. So it liked to go around meddling in other people's business. And it saw lonely Johnny and went over to Johnny. Now the lizard, it had been around a while, and it kind of knew that Johnny was sad, and it said, "What's wrong, Johnny?" And Johnny was honest, and he explained. He said, "You know, Ray and the other roses, they're so beautiful, and their flowers are so pretty, and they're getting all this attention from the birds and the bees, but I'm not getting any attention, and I'm sad." And the lizard smiled. A sneaky, crafty smile. And this lizard said, "Well, Johnny, if you're sad and lonely, and these rose bushes are getting all the attention, why don't you just be a rose bush?" And Johnny, a little confused, said, "But I'm not a rose bush. I don't look like a rose bush." And the lizard smiled again and said, "What if I told you you could look like that and get some of that attention?" Johnny was curious about this. And Johnny said, "Well, what do you mean?" The lizard said, "Hold on," and scurried away. A short time, the lizard came back with many fallen petals that had come off the rose bushes. Brought some of the beauty of the rose bushes over to Johnny. Johnny admired the beauty of those pretty petals. And the lizard said, "Johnny, what if I put some of these petals on you? Then you'll be pretty." Johnny really liked those petals, and he said, "Yeah, why not?" So the lizard went about shoving those petals in different places. And Johnny could see down in that puddle from the rain, and he liked the way that the light danced off those red and pink and white petals. And he was getting some attention from the lizard. And the lizard said, "Next, you might want to consider changing your name. Johnny's not a common name for roses." And it began to get late that day, and the lizard went away. And Johnny sat there thinking about these things. Early in the morning, a young squirrel came hopping along, looking for entertainment, as young squirrels do. The young squirrel was jumping and running around, and it came over to Johnny and looked, turned its head one way and then another. It looked at Johnny and said, "Johnny, why do you have rose petals?" And Johnny said, "I want to be a rose bush. And in fact, call me Rose." Now the young squirrel was young and just mostly wanted to play and be entertained. And the young squirrel thought, I like to climb, but I can't really climb the rose bushes. They're not really made for that, and they have those thorns. And he thought to himself, and he said, "You know what? I'll call you Rose if I can climb on you." And Johnny thought about it and said, "Okay." And the young squirrel said, "Okay, Rose," and proceeded to climb all over Johnny and push him this way and that way. And although Johnny didn't particularly like being climbed on or pushed around, he did like the attention. And at least he wasn't lonely anymore. And the young squirrel went away that day. And Johnny thought about these things. And he said, when I started listening to that lizard, I got attention. I got attention. Maybe that lizard is right. Maybe I can be a rose bush. And I'll get attention. And I'll be happy. Now some time went by. And the lizard would often come by and bring petals to Johnny, which he appreciated. Always admired their beauty. And the young squirrel would come to play and call him Rose. And this went on for a time, and one morning, the lizard, it looked up at Johnny and said, "Johnny, you're getting fairly tall. You got those long limbs. I don't know if that'll do. Rose bushes don't have those long limbs." And Johnny looked in the puddle, looked at himself, looked at the rose bushes, and the lizard was correct about that. He was tall and getting taller and long-limbed, and the rose bushes weren't like that. And he said, "Well, what do I do, lizard?" And the lizard said, "Well, you can chop those limbs off, and they'll grow out to the side, and you'll look more like a rose bush." And the lizard looked up and smiled and said, "Perhaps in time, you'll even be a rose bush." Johnny thought about it and he said, but lizard, one time when it rained and the winds came, one of just a little part of my branches broke and it really hurt." And the lizard said, yeah, it's going to hurt, but only for a little while. And if you really want to be a rose bush, I think that's the best way to go about it." And the lizard finished putting the petals and said, "Okay, Rose, it's getting night. I need to go home. I'll see you tomorrow." And Johnny thought about it, and although he wasn't sure, and he really didn't like the idea of being hurt, he really didn't want to be sad and lonely. And he had been getting attention from the young squirrel. Even if it was not the kind of attention he wanted, at least he didn't feel so alone. He thought about it that night. And early in the morning when the young squirrel came hopping by to play, Johnny told him about the plan. And the young squirrel said, "Well, can I still play on you after you have those limbs of yours taken off?" And Johnny said, "Well, yeah, you're my friend." The young squirrel said, "Well, yeah, then I don't see a problem with that." And then when the lizard came and said, "Hey, Rose," the lizard went about placing the fallen rose petals on Johnny, because unlike the rose bushes that grew them naturally, the ones on Johnny withered every day and had to be replaced. And as it went about placing the petals, "Do you still want to be a rose bush?" And Johnny said, "Well, yeah, I guess." The lizard smiled and said, "I've been thinking, I'm not strong enough, I can't climb well enough to take care of those pesky limbs for you that are stopping you from being a rose bush. But, I know the ravens, and the ravens can fly, and they're pretty strong. They can break things. I think we could get them to do it." The lizard says as it placed many, many rose petals on Johnny, more than usual, so that even some of the bees came over to look at Johnny. And Johnny liked the attention. And he spent that day covered in petals with the young squirrel, pushing him around, bending him this way and that. And he thought about it when the animals had gone away for the day. And he thought, I don't like the idea of the pain of being broken. But what I really don't like is the pain of being alone. The sadness of being alone. And Johnny felt the cold air of the night come on and fell asleep. Little Johnny awoke to a strange sound and passing shadows. The screaming, screeching of ravens circling overhead. It was barely light, and he looked up and saw the lizard with its smile and said, "Good news. Good news, Rose. I found the ravens and they've agreed to do it." And Johnny looked at Lizard and said, "Lizard, I don't know. It's going to hurt." And the lizard said, "It's okay, Rose. You're just scared and confused. I've went through a lot of trouble to arrange this. And these ravens are going to be mad. Also, your friend, the squirrel, he already thinks you're a rose bush. He calls you Rose. What's going to happen when you keep getting taller and I can't put these petals on you if you don't do this? He's going to stop being your friend too. And then you'll be alone." And Johnny felt that deep in his core, that fear of being alone. Johnny's leaves started shaking with a cold wind. The lizard looked up and smiled at one of the ravens and nodded. And a large, fast, slick, jet black raven dropped down with a crash and landed on Johnny's tallest limb. And Johnny felt the weight of that raven and the weight of his decision. And he struggled to keep that limb up. And he felt the sharp beak of that raven dig in and braced himself for the pain. Just then, the raven let go and snapped its head. Its attention focused on a path in the distance. And Johnny heard a sound of footsteps. Footsteps unlike any of the creatures in the garden. End of part 1. Stand by for part 2. Now this noise, these footsteps, were unlike any other Johnny had heard. walking along the path were two strong legs. At this sound, the raven screamed and flew away. When Johnny looked, the lizard was long gone. In fact, there was a calm, still quietness in the garden as the man walked. Johnny had heard about the gardener. He was spoken of with respect, and it was said that he was wiser than all the beasts in the garden and all the birds of the air and everything that moved on the earth. Johnny was very much waiting to see this man. In what seemed like a long time, he saw the man coming up along the path, along the way. Not only did he see the man, but the man walked up, right up to Johnny. Now Johnny couldn't say anything to the man, but the man sat down and looked at Johnny. In fact, the man stooped down and uncovered a small plaque that he had made, that it had been covered up. It said Johnny the oak. And the man said, "You know, Johnny, I planted you here in this spot, and I planted Ray over there in that spot." And Johnny was struck to the core with this. He didn't just happen to be here in this spot like he was. He was planted. He was planted on purpose by this man, the gardener. The man who kept and took care of the garden. And he said, "Yes, I planted you here. And I planted the rose bushes over there on purpose, by design. I made it that way." And while Johnny wondered why such a wise man would plant him the way that he was there, the man continued. And he said, "Yes, you see, oaks and roses are very different. You see, roses grow up and out quickly. They fill out faster. They make very pretty flowers that the bees enjoy. That's what rose bushes do. They're beautiful." He said, "But you, Johnny, you're an oak. Oaks, no matter what, never make roses." And Johnny was struck by the truth of this statement. The man continued. He said, "Yes, roses and oaks are different, and they are both beautiful in their time." The man continued, "You see, right now, your limbs that don't seem to be doing much are helping grow roots deep down that can't be seen, but they're making you strong. One day, you'll be the strongest plant in the garden." Johnny was struck by this because he hadn't been surrounded by mature, strong oak trees. He hadn't considered it, and the lizard never bothered to mention it to him. The man said, "In time, you will be beautiful in your own way, a handsome, strong oak tree that bears its own kind of fruit, not a rose, but an acorn. And you provide and protect for the rest of the plants in the garden. See, I planted you over here and the rose bushes over there, so that when the storms come and the winds blow, your strength, your roots, they'll protect those around you. They'll shield them from the storms to come. And not only that, but one day, and it takes longer than a rose bush, but one day you'll make acorns, a massed crop, a staple for the whole garden. Squirrel and deer and many other things will enjoy what you can provide for them, and a rose bush can never make an acorn. Some things in life cannot be changed, whether you like it or not. You were designed to be an oak tree, and you will never, no matter how much you look like it or change yourself, you will never ever be a rose bush. Some things in life are that way, and I knew you were an oak, and I planted you here in this time, in this place, for a purpose. You are not an accident. The fact that you are an oak is not an accident. That's your role. That's why you were designed and planted here, to provide and protect for those around you. And although it may not seem like you're doing much now, you are growing stronger. Johnny was filled with amazement at the beautiful truth that the gardener spoke. He continued. He said, "You know, Johnny, patience, endurance, and strength, those are good qualities. And they're especially fitting for an oak tree. And although those roses are blossoming now and getting attention, and they're very pretty, you're not a rose bush, and you're never going to be a rose bush. You're an oak. If you will be strong and endure, in time, you will be what that rose bush can never be, strong, providing and protecting for those in the forest. If you want to fulfill what you were put here for, you must be those things, what you were put here to be, strong, with patience and endurance. Although it may be hard at the moment, it may not feel good. Both you and the rose bush were designed to be beautiful in your time. In the spring, the rose bush will bloom and be beautiful and pretty. And in the fall, you will be a shelter in the storms. You will provide for those in the garden. Being strong, providing and protecting, even sheltering your friend Ray, and sustaining the squirrels. You have your own beautiful purpose. If you can endure and be strong, one day you will look back and this will be but a short amount of time and a short season in your life as a strong, abundant life as an oak tree. The man stood there in silence, looking around the garden for what seemed like a long time. And although this is not exactly what Johnny wanted to hear, he knew that it was true, and he knew that it was better. And the gardener was wise, and he believed and trusted that gardener. Johnny felt a joy and a peace that he hadn't felt before. The man, while stepping off, said, "Now, I have a lizard to deal with." End of Johnny Was an Oak. I hope you enjoyed this free audio book. It is free to listen to and free to share. Please feel free to share with anybody you think that it will help. It is hopefully a blessing, and blessings are meant to be shared. Again, feel free to listen absolutely free and share it absolutely free. Play it for whomever you want, for as many people as you want in public, totally for free. If you do want to support and give, you have it in your heart to give willingly, there should be a link in the show notes. Thanks for listening, and have a blessed day.